Reverse culture shock. After spending 20 years living in Japan and then returning back here to New Zealand, I sometimes get hit by it in seemingly quite subtle ways. It's not necessarily things you notice like the lack of public amenities like public transportation or not so many convenience stores around or lack of Amazon Prime delivery, that sort of thing. It can be little things like behaviour, and this is something I've come to notice here in New Zealand quite recently. Lately I've had a couple more little reminders about reverse culture shock. Specifically, it's to do with behaviour. More specifically, I'm talking about how people in New Zealand react to, let's just say, bad public behaviour. And even more specifically, people's lack of reaction to any bad behaviour. We don't like confrontation here in New Zealand. Now, sometimes that can be a pretty good thing, other times not so great. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. Something that I kind of forgot being away from New Zealand for so long was that New Zealanders are basically very humble, a little bit shy, maybe a little bit socially passive. Now that passiveness can sometimes, morph into a little bit passive-aggressive behavior because we don't like to confront people so much. We try to do it a little bit indirectly if we're going to be confrontational at all. It reminds me of a course I did at work a few years ago, which was about workplace psychology and how to better get on with people at work, analyzing their personality types, that sort of thing. And I remember they gave us this reading pack, and the reading pack had this article about confrontation and assertiveness. And it listed the most assertive countries at the top. And I think at the top, the most assertive countries were places like Israel, Germany, those sorts of places. Anyway, right at the very bottom was New Zealand. Well, not exactly right at the very bottom, but pretty close to it. I think we were way down there with the likes of Japan, unironically. Yeah, when I saw that, I did chuckle to myself a little bit because it reminded me of how, basically in New Zealand we are a bit confrontation averse. We don't tend to assert ourselves publicly very strongly. And as I've said before, that can be a good thing at times. But I want to share with you today a few examples of how and why this lack of assertiveness or avoidance of confrontation in New Zealand culture shocked me a little bit, and has been another example of reverse culture shock that has just come to my mind recently. So recently my wife and I were at the local stadium here watching a rugby match. Something we do quite often actually with big rugby fans. Now anybody who's familiar with watching sport at a stadium will be able to relate to this quite well. We're watching the game and at some point someone starts kicking the seat behind me. Well, not exactly the seat behind me, but it's like a few spaces down. But of course it just vibrates across the whole row of seats. And when it first started, I thought like, okay, it happens from time to time. I'm just gonna leave this for a little bit. But a few minutes later, it starts again and it gets really, really bad this time. It's like, dum, 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 dum. And it's shaking the seat really badly. And I look to my left where these guys are sitting directly in front of the seats that are being kicked. And they're doing that sort of thing. They're sitting on the edge of their seat, like just sort of trying to sort of avoid the whole situation. And I turn around and it's just a little girl, right? 7 or 8 years old. So like, oh, right, okay. And I just sort of get her attention and say, oh, hey, can you just be careful? Like, make sure your feet don't hit the seat because it really, really shakes a lot. And her dad's like looking at me at this point. It's like, oh, what's going on? So like, oh, nothing, just, your daughter's feet, they're just swinging into the seat, so like, just be careful. And he's like, oh yeah, be careful. So problem solved, a very civil discourse happened there. Just a little kid doing what kids do, really. But later on that evening, I was reminded of the situation because my wife and I were talking about it. And I was thinking about the guys who were having their seat directly pounded on. And I thought, why didn't those guys say anything? And it reminded me of another very similar situation, again, very recently at a different rugby match we were watching, this time with a bunch of young guys behind us who just kept thumping away at the seats. These guys were like, I don't know, early 20-something. They could have been even younger, actually. There were big my first beer vibes about them. But anyway, same story, right? They're kicking the seats away. It's mildly annoying and it's kind of getting worse. But then the announcer starts playing some music and they start just pounding away to the beat. So I turn around and say like, hey guys, like it's really, really uncomfortable if you're gonna keep doing that. And they're like, oh, okay. Lately I felt like it's annoying to have to keep doing that. nobody else seems to be willing or able to say anything. I forgot about how unconfrontational New Zealanders are, basically. Now, I wouldn't call myself a particularly assertive or confrontational guy either, but in situations where someone is clearly inconveniencing me, my family, people immediately around me, I will say something. Because if you let people behave badly like that, they'll keep doing it. Or even worse, they don't even realize that what they're doing is bad behavior and it's really inconveniencing others around them. And it also made me think, is it me? Have I changed a lot from living overseas? Now, earlier I said that New Zealand was lumped down the bottom of a list of countries according to how assertive or confrontational they are, and they were very close to Japan. And Japan was where I lived for 20 odd years. Now, Japan is famous for being non-confrontational and not very assertive. However, I will say this about Japanese culture: there is a very, very, very strong notion that you must not upset or inconvenience others in the first place. So that's something that's quite different. But yeah, they are famously unconfrontational in Japan. So I don't think living in Japan made me more confrontational at all. After all, it's not like I was living somewhere famously confrontational like Italy or somewhere in the Middle East. But on further thought, perhaps returning to New Zealand from Japan has subconsciously freed me up, so to speak. Maybe I feel less restrained now to speak out when I feel like others are inconveniencing me or people around myself. Maybe it's an age thing. After all, I am going to be 50 next year, and people do say that as you get older, you tend to care a lot less about what others think, and you get a lot more open about sharing your opinion. So there could be some truth to that. But this whole reverse culture shock experience I've had lately also reminded me of another anecdote. Sorry, this is a bit anecdote heavy, this video. From before I went to go and live in Japan. This was back when I was in my early 20s, and I remember I was commuting to work on a busy train in the morning, and there were a bunch of high school boys sitting in the back of the car, and they had this rugby ball and they're like throwing it around to each other, across seats to their mates, that sort of thing. And I'm sitting there thinking, geez, they're getting a bit carefree passing that ball around, and it's not exactly something you should be doing in a shared space like this either. And fast forward to a few minutes later, I'm sitting there minding my own business, I don't know, looking out the window or something, and I feel a distinct thud on the back of my head. Wouldn't you know it, it was that rugby ball. And I remember this quite clearly. I just turned around and I gave these boys a massive spray in front of everybody. And there was even a little bit of coarse language involved. Now, nothing that your average New Zealand teenage boy wouldn't hear on a daily basis. I remember shocking myself at the time because I've already explained that I'm a reasonably quiet, sort of conservative guy out in public. So I was quite shocked that I did this, but I just did it. I just let rip on these guys, and it went deathly silent in there. And you know what? They put the rugby ball away, and it was a very comfortable ride from there on in. So maybe that's always been in me. Maybe it's an Italian thing. I don't know. I mean, after all, that's my dad's ancestry. And when I think about my old man, he certainly doesn't take any S from people. Neither did his grandfather. So it could be something in that. Anyway, that's just another little example of reverse culture shock I've experienced lately. I'd be interested to know any other examples from people who've lived overseas, come back to their country, what they've noticed has shocked them in subtle ways. Drop them in the comments. Love to read them. Anyway, thanks for watching.